Esa proclama es patria o muerte.
Welcome to Book Blink. Today we're exploring the life of the legendary Che Guevara, revolutionary, icon, and symbol of rebellion. From his rise in Cuba to his final days in Bolivia, Che's journey was filled with daring ideals, bold actions, and deep sacrifices. Was he a hero or a controversial figure? Let's dive in and discover the story behind the man who changed the world. Part 1. The beginning of a revolutionary journey. Imagine a young man, restless with a sense of the world's unfairness, eager to change everything. This is where the story of Ernesto Che Guevara begins. It was the early 1950s, and Guevara was a medical student in Argentina. But his world was not defined by textbooks and stethoscopes. It was filled with poverty, injustice, and a burning desire to make a difference. His journey, like so many others before him, would begin with a motorcycle trip. In 1952, Guevara, accompanied by his friend Alberto Granado, set off on a journey across South America that would forever alter the course of his life. Their trip was far more than just an adventure. It was an eye-opening experience. As they traveled, Guevara encountered the severe poverty and inequality that plagued the continent. From the indigenous people working in the mines of Chile to the destitute workers in the slums of Lima, Guevara saw firsthand the struggle of the oppressed. It was here that the seed of revolution began to grow in his mind. The continent, he realized, was not only divided by class but also by the deep chasm between the rich and the poor. One encounter in particular would leave a lasting impression. In the mountains of Peru, Guevara witnessed a group of poor workers who had been exploited by foreign companies. He was struck by their helplessness, their sense of defeat, and their lack of power to change their situation. In that moment, Guevara realized that this injustice could not continue. It was not enough to be a doctor and heal the sick. He had to fight for the people. The journey across South America opened his eyes to the injustices that fueled the oppression of the poor. As Guevara traveled deeper into the heart of the continent, his idealism turned into a call for action. It was no longer about simply witnessing the world's problems. It was about changing them. He began to think of himself not as a physician, but as a revolutionary, someone who could spark the change the world desperately needed. Guevara's journey was not just a physical one, but an internal one, a transformation from an idealistic youth to a man with a mission. He had seen enough of the world to know that only a revolution could bring true justice to the people. He was no longer just a witness to history, he was determined to make it. The path to revolution was not easy. It would be filled with struggles, betrayal, and deep personal sacrifices. But Guevara, fueled by his experiences and his growing desire for change, would soon find himself at the heart of a movement that would shake the foundations of the world. This is just the beginning of Che Guevara's journey, a journey that would lead him to become one of the most iconic figures in modern history. His story was just starting, and the world would soon know his name. Part 2. A Revolutionary Awakens. After his transformative journey across South America, Che Guevara returned to Mexico, where the next chapter of his life began. His arrival in Mexico marked the start of his involvement in the Cuban Revolution, a turning point that would shape not just his destiny, but the future of Latin America. In 1955, Guevara met Fidel Castro, a young Cuban revolutionary, and his brother Raúl. At that time, they were plotting to overthrow the dictatorial regime of Cuban leader Fulgencio Batista. The Castros and Guevara quickly formed a bond, not only because of their shared desire for change, but because of their deep conviction that a revolution could bring about a new future for the oppressed. Guevara, who had grown disillusioned with the political systems of Latin America, saw in the Castros the opportunity to enact the change he had dreamed about. This was not just an ideological partnership, it was a partnership built on a shared vision. For Guevara, the Cuban Revolution represented more than a fight against Batista. It was a battle against the forces of imperialism and inequality that dominated the region. Before joining the Castros, Guevara wasn't a well-known figure in revolutionary circles, but his intellectual background and medical training gave him a unique perspective on leadership. He wasn't merely a fighter, he was a strategist, a visionary, and a man who understood the importance of both planning and action. he quickly became one of the most trusted commanders of the revolutionary movement. The revolutionary campaign, known as the 26th of July movement, took off in the Sierra Maestra Mountains of Cuba, where Guevara and the other guerrillas began their fight against Batista's regime. The conditions were harsh, terrain that was difficult to navigate, supplies that were scarce, and the constant threat of ambush by Batista's forces. But Guevara was undeterred. His medical skills were vital in treating the wounded, and his unwavering resolve inspired the other revolutionaries. During this time, Guevara's leadership and ability to inspire others became apparent. He was not just a commander who issued orders, he was a man who led by example. He fought alongside his men, shared in their struggles, and showed them the importance of discipline, sacrifice, and unity. His ability to instill a sense of purpose and commitment in the revolutionaries made him an indispensable part of the movement. But Guevara was more than just a fighter. He was an ideologue, someone who believed that the revolution was about more than just removing a dictator. It was about creating a new society, one that would prioritize equality, justice, and the collective good over individual gain. His commitment to these ideals would shape the course of the Cuban Revolution and his own personal journey. As the guerrilla campaign in Cuba gained momentum, Guevara's reputation grew. He became a symbol of the revolutionary spirit, not just in Cuba but across Latin America. His vision for a future without exploitation and oppression captured the imagination of many. Guevara was no longer just a doctor or a traveler. He was a revolutionary leader, one whose ideas and actions would echo around the world. The revolution was gaining strength, but the journey was far from over. Guevara and his comrades were still facing immense challenges, but they were driven by the belief that they were fighting for something far greater than themselves. The revolution was not just a battle for Cuba, it was a battle for the soul of Latin America. Part 3: The Fall of Batista and the Rise of a New Cuba. After years of struggle, the revolutionaries' efforts began to pay off. By the end of 1958, the guerrilla forces led by Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and others had succeeded in gaining widespread support across Cuba. Batista's regime was on the brink of collapse, and the Cuban people, weary of years of corruption, poverty, and violence, rallied behind the rebels. On January 1, 1959, Fulgencio Batista fled Cuba, leaving the country in turmoil. It was a victory, but the real challenge had only just begun. For Guevara and the rest of the revolutionaries, the question now was not just how to overthrow a dictator, but how to rebuild a nation from the ground up. As Guevara and the other leaders of the revolution entered Havana, they were hailed as heroes by the Cuban people. But for Guevara, the celebration was fleeting. He knew that the true work of the revolution lay ahead. Cuba was not only fighting to rid itself of tyranny, but to build a society based on the principles of equality and social justice. Guevara's role in the new government was a critical one. He was appointed to several high-ranking positions, including the role of head of the Cuban National Bank, and later as the Minister of Industry. His work was essential in the early days of the revolution, as Cuba faced numerous challenges, including economic collapse, lack of resources, and pressure from the United States, which was determined to see the revolution fail. One of Guevara's most ambitious goals was the transformation of Cuba's economy. He believed in the importance of industrialization and believed that Cuba could create a socialist economy independent of foreign powers, particularly the United States. He worked tirelessly to implement his vision, advocating for land redistribution, the collectivization of agriculture, and the development of state-run industries. However, Guevara's approach to reform was often harsh. His belief in the need for rapid transformation led him to take drastic measures. He supported the establishment of forced labor camps for those who opposed the revolution, believing that the state had to maintain control and discipline in the face of any resistance. His leadership style, while effective in some areas, also caused divisions within the new government and among the Cuban people. Despite the challenges, Guevara's commitment to the revolution never wavered. His belief in the principles of socialism and his vision for a fair and just society were central to everything he did. However, it became clear that his economic policies were not as successful as he had hoped. Cuba's economic situation worsened. and Guevara's disagreements with other members of the Cuban leadership, particularly with Fidel Castro, began to grow. While Fidel remained focused on maintaining control and stability within Cuba, Guevara's vision extended far beyond the island. He believed that the revolution should spread across Latin America and the world, and that Cuba should serve as a model for other nations seeking to overthrow imperialism. Guevara saw himself as not just a Cuban revolutionary, but a global one. He envisioned a world where imperialism was vanquished and the oppressed people of the world were united in their struggle for equality and justice. This vision would lead Guevara to his next great adventure, his attempt to spread the revolution beyond Cuba. Part 4. The Mission to Bolivia. Che Guevara's belief that the revolution needed to spread beyond Cuba led him to embark on one of the most ambitious and tragic chapters of his life: the mission to spark a revolution in Bolivia. By 1965, Guevara had grown disillusioned with the direction Cuba was heading. He felt that his work on the island had reached its limits, and he believed that the Cuban Revolution, while important, could only be the beginning of a broader global movement. Guevara was convinced that the success of the Cuban Revolution could inspire other Latin American nations to rise up against their imperialist oppressors. He believed that if the revolution could spread through Latin America, it would spark a global wave of change. Bolivia became Guevara's target for this mission. The country, with its entrenched poverty, exploitation of workers, and political instability, seemed ripe for revolution. Guevara's plan was to lead a guerrilla campaign in Bolivia, hoping to inspire the local population to join the fight against the government. He envisioned that this would be the spark that would ignite a continental revolution. To achieve this, Guevara left Cuba and entered Bolivia in 1966, accompanied by a small group of Cuban revolutionaries. They found themselves in an incredibly difficult position. Guevara had no illusions about the challenges ahead. He knew that Bolivia's government would not take kindly to his presence, and that the local population was not as politically mobilized as he had hoped. The peasants, who Guevara believed would rally to the revolution, were wary of his message and the guerrilla fighters, unsure of what they were offering and unsure whether they could afford to risk their lives. Despite the obstacles, Guevara was determined to press on. He believed that the key to success was not only armed struggle, but also creating a deep political and ideological connection with the Bolivian people. However, the Bolivian guerrilla forces faced significant challenges from the start. They struggled with insufficient resources, poor terrain, and inadequate support from the local population. Guevara's health began to deteriorate in the harsh conditions, and the guerrillas were constantly pursued by the Bolivian army, which had the support of the United States. By mid-1967, Guevara's mission in Bolivia had turned into a desperate struggle for survival. His forces were dwindling, and the local population was still largely indifferent to the cause. Guevara, who had been so successful in the Cuban Revolution, found himself in a situation where nothing seemed to go according to plan. The guerrilla campaign was failing and his enemies were closing in. Despite the increasing odds, Guevara remained committed to his cause. He refused to abandon the struggle even as the situation became more dire. However, Guevara's determination would ultimately lead to his downfall. In October 1967, Guevara was captured by the Bolivian army. His last days were filled with a sense of betrayal and abandonment. The revolution that he had spent his life fighting for seemed to be slipping away. He had been isolated, his dream of a continental revolution shattered. On October 9, 1967, after being interrogated, Che Guevara was executed by the Bolivian army at the age of 39. Part 5. Legacy and Myth. The death of Che Guevara marked the end of an era. But for many, it was not the end of his story. His execution in Bolivia only solidified his status as a martyr for revolutionary causes. Despite his failure in Bolivia, Guevara's image became a global symbol of resistance, rebellion, and the fight against oppression. In the wake of his death, Guevara's legacy began to take on mythic proportions. His image, particularly the iconic photograph of him taken by Alberto Corda, became one of the most recognizable symbols of revolutionary fervor in the 20th century. This image, a haunting portrait of a man with intense, unwavering eyes, captured the essence of Guevara's spirit: defiant, resolute, and unyielding in his pursuit of social justice. His writings, too, became influential. Guevara's guerrilla warfare and the motorcycle diaries were read by millions around the world, sparking a wave of revolutionary thought. His vision for a world free of imperialism and exploitation resonated with oppressed people everywhere. His words, his passion, and his undying commitment to his beliefs spoke to those who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles. In Latin America, Guevara's death only intensified his symbolic importance. He was celebrated as a hero by some and reviled as a misguided dreamer by others. However, what was undeniable was his influence on the political landscape of the continent. His revolutionary ideals provided a blueprint for leftist movements and guerrilla struggles across the region for decades to come. Guevara was hailed as a champion of the poor, a martyr who had given his life for the liberation of the oppressed. But Guevara's legacy was not without its contradictions. While he is celebrated for his idealism and commitment to social justice, his methods, particularly his endorsement of violence and his role in the establishment of authoritarian regimes in Cuba, have been criticized. Some view him as a hero, while others see him as a figure whose vision led to suffering and repression. The debates surrounding his legacy continue to this day. His dream of spreading revolution beyond Cuba was never fully realized, but his ideals lived on in various revolutionary movements. Guevara's commitment to anti-imperialism, his rejection of capitalist exploitation, and his vision of global revolution became the foundation for many leftist movements worldwide. Yet his influence also had its darker side. In Cuba, his policies were sometimes harsh, leading to forced labor camps and executions, which have left a complex legacy of both admiration and criticism. Guevara's death, however, did not mark the end of his influence. His name continued to inspire generations of revolutionaries, activists, and thinkers. From Latin America to Africa, from the Middle East to Asia, Guevara's ideas echoed in the struggles of countless people fighting against imperialism, inequality, and oppression. The contradictions of his life and legacy have made him one of the most enigmatic figures in modern history. Guevara's pursuit of a just world, his vision of an equitable society, and his willingness to sacrifice everything for his beliefs continue to be debated. But what cannot be denied is the profound impact he had on the world. Che Guevara's life is a story of idealism, struggle, and sacrifice. His journey from the privileged son of Argentine middle-class parents to the symbol of global revolution is one that reflects the profound transformations of the 20th century. His legacy, complex as it is, remains a testament to the power of conviction and the relentless pursuit of a better world, no matter the cost. Part 6. Reflections on Che Guevara's ideals and impact. Che Guevara's life and legacy continue to provoke powerful reactions around the world, especially as new generations discover his story. His image, most famously captured in Corda's photograph, remains a symbol of rebellion, standing for the ideal of a world unshackled from imperialism, inequality, and injustice. But behind that image lies a story far more complicated and full of contradictions. One of the most striking aspects of Guevara's legacy is his unwavering commitment to the idea of global revolution. He never saw his mission as confined to the borders of Cuba. Guevara believed in the necessity of a global struggle for liberation, a struggle against the exploitation and dominance of imperialist powers, particularly the United States. He argued that only through armed struggle could the oppressed peoples of the world achieve freedom and justice. This belief drove his actions from his involvement in the Cuban Revolution to his ill-fated Bolivian campaign. Yet, Guevara's commitment to armed struggle and violent revolution remains one of the most controversial aspects of his ideology. His vision of a world without exploitation and imperialism led him to embrace the idea of guerrilla warfare as a necessary tool for change. This willingness to use violence and confrontational tactics, even in the face of immense adversity, shaped much of his revolutionary career. For Guevara, the end justified the means. He believed that the liberation of the people was worth any cost. But this philosophy, while admirable in its boldness, also had darker consequences. In Cuba, Guevara was instrumental in establishing a system that included executions of those he considered counter-revolutionaries. His methods of reform, often harsh and uncompromising, raised questions about the balance between justice and tyranny. In his efforts to create a socialist society, Guevara's vision sometimes clashed with the realities of governance and human rights. Moreover, his attempt to export revolution to other countries, particularly his campaign in Bolivia, revealed the limits of his ideology. Guevara's belief that revolution could be ignited simply by the presence of a few committed guerrilla fighters underestimated the complexities of local politics, culture, and society. His failure in Bolivia, marked by miscalculation and lack of support, highlighted the challenges of bringing about revolutionary change in different contexts. The Bolivian campaign became a symbol of Guevara's idealism, but also of his inability to fully understand the nuances of the very people he sought to liberate. Despite these challenges, Guevara's ideas continue to inspire political movements around the world. His commitment to the oppressed, his rejection of capitalist exploitation, and his vision of a fairer world resonate with activists, students, and revolutionaries across the globe. For many, Guevara represents the possibility of a better future, one in which social and economic equality triumphs over corporate greed and imperial dominance. In a world still grappling with inequality, poverty, and injustice, Che Guevara's message remains as relevant as ever. His willingness to sacrifice everything, his life, his health, his comfort, pursuing the belief that another world is possible, continues to resonate with those who seek change. Guevara's legacy is undoubtedly complicated, filled with both admiration and criticism. His ideas have been co-opted by various movements, sometimes in ways he might not have intended. But in the end, Che Guevara's life remains a testament to the power of conviction, the depth of idealism, and the struggle for a world where justice and equality reign. As we reflect on his life, we are reminded of the enduring human desire for a better world, one that, as Guevara believed, is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And with that, we conclude the journey through the life of Che Guevara, a man whose vision, passion, and ideals continue to shape the world's understanding of revolution and resistance. His story is one of unwavering commitment, sacrifice, and the pursuit of justice, no matter the cost. Guevara's legacy, both revered and controversial, challenges us to think about the price of change and the power of conviction. Thank you for joining us in this exploration of a revolutionary life. Be sure to subscribe for more insightful stories and analyses of history's most impactful figures.